On the broadcast tonight, a resolution with real teeth. U.S. President Barack Obama slaps new sanctions on North Korea, the first to exclusively target North Korea. South Korea rolls out more support measures for South Korean companies with factories in the now suspended Inter-Korean Joint Industrial Park. And Korea's financial authorities warn they would take all measures necessary against excessive movement in $1 trading. The local currency ends trading at a near 6-year low against the greenback. NEWSCENTER begins right now. It is 8 a.m. in New York, 12 noon in London, and 10 on a Friday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. We begin this Friday night in Washington. U.S. President Barack Obama has stamped approval on a new sanctions bill designed and customized exclusively for North Korea. They're intended to starve the reclusive state of the money it needs to develop miniaturized warheads and the long-range missiles required to launch them. As our Park Ji-won reports, South Korea welcomed the move and vowed concerted measures against Pyongyang.
In response to Pyongyang's hydrogen bomb test and missile launch, U.S. President Barack Obama signed a series of new and tough sanctions against North Korea on Thursday. With the signing, the bill welcomed on both sides of the aisle of Congress took effect immediately. The sanctions aim to cut off any transactions and money that could be funneled into North Korea for further development of nuclear programs. The sanctions allow the freezing of assets of any individuals or enterprises engaged in business related to North Korea's nuclear or weapons programs. Those engaged in the import or export of luxury goods to and from North Korea and those involved in serious human rights abuses will also be subjected to the law. The South Korean government welcomed the latest imposition of new sanctions. In a written statement Friday, the South Korean Foreign Ministry vowed to cooperate with the international community on concerted measures to counter North Korean threats. The ministry said it expects the sanctions, which passed Congress with bipartisan support and the first to solely target North Korea, to provide a solid foundation for implementing strong and effective measures. The ministry added that the South Korean government will take every possible measure to induce Pyongyang to relinquish its nuclear ambitions. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, with the signing of that bill, U.S. sanctions against North Korea take effect. It went through both houses of the U.S. government at an unprecedented speed. How did that happen, and how are these sanctions designed to hurt that regime? Our Kwon Jang-ho explains.
The North Korea Sanctions and Policy Enhancement Act came into force as soon as President Obama signed the bill on Thursday. It's the first bill that targets North Korea specifically, and it marks a change of stance from Washington. Previous North Korea sanction bills had never made it past both the Senate and the Congress due to lawmakers looking to encourage negotiations with the communist state. But North Korea's recent actions have shifted opinion, and the bill passed through the chambers in an unusually quick fashion, garnering support from both sides of the aisle. On average, a bill takes 4 to 8 months to become law. This bill was signed in 37 days.
The speedy process of signing up and passing and signing up this resolution reflect the urgency and importance of the issue, North Korean nuclear issue, from the perspective of the United States.
The sanctions will freeze the assets of anyone under U.S. jurisdiction doing any kind of business related to North Korea's nuclear or weapons program or involved in human rights abuses. But perhaps more significantly is that the sanctions will now carry out secondary boycotts, meaning that the U.S. will also block any businesses and groups that do trade with the regime in third-party countries as well. The bill has been designed to choke off any outside sources of cash coming into the regime via such exports of coal, iron ore and other mineral resources from the north. These sanctions are expected to have the biggest impact in China. Although it is difficult to get definitive numbers, about 90% of North Korea's overseas trade is done with Chinese partners. Trade between China and North Korea is said to be worth about $6.8 billion. It's currently hard to say which Chinese companies are currently in business with both North Korea and the US for the sanctions to take effect, but there are precedents. In 2013, the US government issued notices on 5 Chinese companies which had violated US government sanctions on Iran, Syria and North Korea, although which countries the companies were working with were not specified. Experts say that there is a possibility that China could react in a similar fashion.
China can do something about the US company which is involved in the weapons trade toward Taiwan. So there has been some dispute between the United States and China over this issue, but actually China indirectly used that kinds of measures vis-a-vis the US companies, which is...
The US sanctions come as negotiations are ongoing on a new UN Security Council resolution on North Korea. China, one of the 5 permanent members of the Council, has expressed its reservations about new UN sanctions on North Korea, suggesting instead a resumption of talks with the regime. But the South Korean government rejected such a proposal, saying the North needs first to stop provocations and show signs it is moving towards denuclearization. Washington is hoping that these sanctions and the upcoming UN Security Council resolution will encourage Beijing to take greater control over Pyongyang. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
And on the heels of the U.S. sanctions against the North Korean regime, the Japanese government has confirmed its own set of punitive measures towards North Korea following the latest provocations. At a cabinet meeting today, Tokyo made official the sanctions submitted to the National Security Council on February 10th, which include a complete ban on North Korean ships and their nationals from entering Japan. Now, the measures also toughen financial reporting requirements for cash transfers to Pyongyang. Meanwhile, South Korea has questioned whether North Korea has the right to stay a member of the United Nations. During an open discussion at the UN headquarters in New York, Seoul's ambassador to the UN made those remarks, highlighting Pyongyang's continuous violations of the UNSC resolutions. Park Jong-hong has this report.
North Korea's eligibility as a UN member has come under the spotlight. Speaking at a meeting on respect for UN principles and goals at the New York headquarters this week, South Korea's ambassador to the United Nations, Oh Jun, launched a scathing attack on Pyongyang.
Past decade, the DPRK has persistently violated all Security Council resolutions on the DPRK, calls into question its qualification as a member of the United Nations.
He made a point that upon becoming a member, North Korea had solemnly pledged to comply with the obligations of the UN. He added that the repeated breaches are not only a direct challenge to the authority of the Security Council, but also a display of contempt and disregard. Concluding his remarks, he called for the Security Council to adopt a, quote, robust and comprehensive resolution against the regime for its latest provocations. The rebuke was echoed by South Korea's Deputy Ambassador Han Chung-hee at a special committee of the UN Charter. In response, North Korea's representative to the UN claimed the Security Council does not have the right to ban the peaceful launch of a satellite aimed at defending North Korea's sovereignty and developing the economy. Most of the international community sees Pyongyang's satellite launch as a cover for a long-range ballistic missile test. This marks the first time South Korea has formally taken issue with North Korea's UN status since both Koreas became members in 1991. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea is ratcheting up its condemnations and verbal attacks on South Korea and the U.S. as Seoul and Washington are set to begin formal talks on introducing the U.S. Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD, to the Korean Peninsula. What did Pyongyang have to say this time? Our national defense correspondent, Kim Hyun-bin.
North Korea condemned both Seoul and Washington for the possible deployment of the U.S. Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD, on the Korean Peninsula and threatened to attack the U.S. Pacific Islands and South Korea if the allies carry out such plans. North Korea's Korean Central TV said on Friday that the THAAD deployment will heighten tensions in the region and in turn lead to a military clash. It added that THAAD will also pose a threat to the national security of neighboring countries. THAAD is a defensive weapons system used against hostile airborne threats, such as ballistic missiles. The system could intercept missiles at a range of 200 kilometers and altitudes of some 150 kilometers. If deployed, Seoul will provide a physical location to install the THAAD battery and necessary infrastructure, while Washington will pay for the deployment of the system and operating troops. South Korea and the U.S. started official talks for the possible deployment of THAAD earlier this month. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
South Korea has rolled out additional support measures for enterprises with factories in the now suspended Inter-Korean Joint Industrial Park. Now, these businesses were kicked out of the complex in the North Korean city of Kaesong last week, forced to leave behind all their assets and inventory. Connie Kim tells us how the government plans to compensate their losses.
South Korea's Special Government Task Team has laid out additional support measures for companies affected by the shutdown of the Inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex. The meeting was a third of its kind, headed by 8 related ministries, the Financial Services Commission, and the Small and Medium Business Administration, following Seoul's announcement last week of support measures for firms that were expelled from the park.
We will finalize measures to allow the hiring of more foreign workers, support company owners with new factory sites in the south, and those that have provided services to businesses at the complex.
Seoul will provide factory sites for companies that are having difficulty securing alternative land to operate. Currently, there are 56 factory sites available to factory owners, which will be provided rent-free for the first year and half-price for the following 2 years. In addition, company owners will be allowed to hire more foreign workers, as many as 40% of the legal quota. The measure is aimed at utilizing cheap labor, as North Korean workers were paid some $130 a month at the Kaesong factory. More tax exemption benefits will be extended to Kaesong complex company owners. Under the newly released measures, South Koreans that have worked at the complex will pay half the health insurance fees and 70% of their employment insurance for half a year. The measures are in line with the government's plan to mitigate the losses of companies after the last remaining vestige of inter-Korean cooperation shut down. Seoul has benefited economically to the tune of some $3.2 billion from operations at the industrial park over the past 10 years, more than 10 times that of Pyongyang. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
It's not just the 100-plus South Korean businesses with factories in the Kaesong industrial complex that are worried about possible damages from the abrupt shutdown. Now, although not directly affected and really unclear whether and when they will feel the blow, also jittery are those with stores that sell products made at the Kaesong industrial zone. Our Lee Ji-won went out to these shops.
This shop in the popular tourist district of Insadong in central Seoul only sells products made at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, with the hope of playing even a small role in the unification of the two Koreas. Its exclusive focus on goods from the Inter-Korean factory make it the only shop of its kind in the country. Since opening in September, the shop has become known among locals not only for that, but also for its high-quality inventory.
The sewing is good and the products are well made. Most importantly, they are less expensive than similar goods in other shops.
The design and texture feel really impressive. I'd like to come here to shop more often.
Soon after opening in Insadong, the shop also launched 5 other branches around the country. But with the abrupt shutdown of Kaesong Industrial Complex, the shop's future and the livelihood of its employees are hanging in the balance.
Everything here, from the shoes to the processed food, is made by 12 of the companies in the Kaesong Industrial Complex. The government's decision to shut the complex down was really devastating, and it means we won't have any products to sell.
The companies with factories in the complex had less than a day to clear out, which meant they had to leave the majority of their raw materials and products behind. Their losses will now be passed on to the Insadong shop and its network. And with the complex closed indefinitely, the shop has canceled its plans to open 3 more branches, while the existing branches are already trying to figure out whether and how they can stay open.
We only have enough stock for 3 to 4 more months, so we're holding meetings to find a solution for our business. It would be best if the industrial park opened again, but if not, we'll have to find other suppliers.
Seoul Mayor Park Won-sun visited the shop this week to encourage the owner and vowed to help them find a way to keep the business open. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
New types of offensives such as terror attacks, cyber attacks, or even attacks involving biological weapons could happen anywhere, anytime, says President Park Geun-hye. Now, that is why the central and local governments must work together to ensure national security. Our Song Ji-san has the details of the president's meeting with the mayors and governors of this country.
17 local government heads sat down with President Park Geun-hye at Cheongwade Friday to discuss ways to enhance synergy between the central government and regions in the country, pledging that the central government will support development led by each region based on their characteristics and strength. The president noted that decentralized autonomy of regional governments allows for more flexibility to adapt to the rapid changes of the future. President Park called on local governments to make greater use of the national chain of innovation centers, employment zones, and regulation-free zones to create momentum, lead growth, and aid the government's reform drives. With the increasing threat of Pyongyang carrying out cyber or biochemical attacks at any time or place, Park called for concerted efforts between the central and local governments to set up a systematic network to combat such aggressions, as failure to respond in a timely manner could result in a national disaster. Local leaders also vowed cooperation, saying the regions share a common destiny. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Over at the National Assembly, it was the second day of the two-day parliamentary interpellation session. As our Shin Se-min reports, taking center stage today was the economy.
Dominating Friday's interpellation session at the National Assembly were questions regarding what the government is doing to breathe new life into the country's slowing economy. Responding to criticism that the current economic policies have been a complete failure as growth figures have consistently been below the target rate, Korea's chief economic policymaker remained optimistic.
The government has been preparing thoroughly for long-term economic growth, so it will take time to see the effects. Even if the figures don't meet the target rate now, we are seeing signs that our economy is on the right path.
Although the Korean economy ended up with 2.6% GDP growth last year, far below the government target rate of 3.1%, the finance minister said the outcome was clear evidence that the economy did well amid lingering uncertainties at home and abroad, like the slowing Chinese economy and a potential rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve. Lawmakers also blame the government for economic losses from the shutdown of Kaesong factory park, estimated to have cost the South Korean government some $3.2 billion.
Although the Kaesong industrial complex was profitable for South Korea, its initial purpose was to benefit inter-Korean relations, not economic growth.
Also during the inquiry, the ruling political party reiterated the need to pass economy-related bills without obstruction, including one on improving the service sector, while the main opposition party cautiously called for the government's thorough review of the U.S. missile defense system, adding that deployment could cause China to retaliate through economic measures, jeopardizing the local economy. With lawmakers emphasizing the need for quick passage of bills to spur economic growth, all that remains is for stalled bills be put to a full floor vote at a regular session scheduled for next Tuesday. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Another volatile session at the local foreign exchange counter today. The Korean won has sunk to a near 6-year low against the U.S. dollar. The country's central bank referred to the recent trend as herd behavior and pledged to take action if necessary. Kim Min-ji has more.
The Korean won took another dive against the U.S. dollar on Friday.
The local currency closed at over 1,234 won against the greenback, down 7 won from the previous day. That's the lowest level in 5 years and 8 months.
This comes on the back of investor appetite for risk-adverse assets after the European Central Bank commented on downside economic risks, such as faltering commodity prices and concerns over China's slowdown in its January minutes, as well as Saudi Arabia opposing a cut in oil production. On top of that, growing expectations of a rate cut by Korea's central bank and geopolitical risks stemming from North Korea's provocations added further downward pressure. At one point, the Korean won was hovering around the 1,241 level, but soon retraced some of its losses after the country's central bank vowed to exhaust all means to tackle the volatility of the local currency.
We remain unchanged in our commitment to deal with excessive volatility in the market and will take all available measures if necessary.
On the local bourse, Korean stocks ended higher, with the benchmark Kospi adding nearly 0.4% and the tech-heavy Kosdaq gaining almost 1%. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's ICT has long been considered an important engine for growth, but even this up-and-coming industry could not avoid being hit by the sluggish global economy. And now the Korean government plans to reverse this trend by upping its support for companies in this sector. Our tech correspondent, Kim Ji-yeon.
The Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning and the country's leading IT organizations have been coming up with ways to boost Korea's ICT exports, which have been slumping for the past 4 months. The private and public entities include Samsung Electronics and LG Electronics, and the state-run Institute for Information and Communications Technology Promotion. The ICT Ministry has vowed to support entities exporting to markets deemed to have great growth potential in the IT sector. For starters, the ministry will support entities exporting goods or services related to information security to the Middle East and Africa. The ministry will help them export goods related to broadcasting contents to countries including Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Britain, and Poland. The ministry says it will target China and the U.S. as potential markets for contents incorporating K-pop music and ICT. With the lifting of global economic sanctions on Iran, the ministry says it will reinstate its ICT partnership with Tehran. The ministry plans to facilitate information sharing among businesses to increase production of various custom-made software contents for foreign markets. In the virtual reality sector, the ministry will utilize on- and offline foreign distribution channels to export broadcasting contents. Entities in the hardware sector asked the ministry to help their foreign branches gain a competitive advantage in foreign premium markets. In response, the ministry vowed to increase visits to some of the regions to revitalize Korea's ICT exports there. The country's ICT exports plunged nearly 18% in January from the same period last year to around $12 billion, largely due to increased competition from cheaper Chinese goods. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump has made it clear this campaign he is not afraid to attack anyone, really not anyone, even the Pope. Bruce Harrison joins me live in the studio with details of this spat between the billionaire and the head of the Catholic Church. Now, Bruce, while Trump did lash out at the Pope, it was in response to the Pope's comments about Trump.
That's right, Kang-young. Apparently, the first blow did come from Pope Francis. He suggested that Donald Trump is not a Christian. The Pope told media on his flight home from Mexico that anyone who only thinks about building walls and not building bridges is not a Christian.
Right. How do we expect Trump's and the Pope's remarks to impact the South Carolina primaries this weekend?
Sure. Well, many voters may hear the Pope's denunciation of Trump and hear it as a sign that he shouldn't deserve the nomination. But it could play in Trump's favor as well, especially in conservative South Carolina. You have some Catholics, especially conservative Catholics, who have grown disillusioned with the Pope because what many believe to be weakening of the church's positions on abortion and homosexuality, for example. Trump blamed the Mexican government, though, for convincing the Pope that he's not, quote, a good guy.
Made a statement about you. I said, the Pope. What did the Pope say? I like the Pope. I mean, was it good or bad? Because if it's good, I like the Pope. If it's bad, I don't like the Pope. No, it's true.
Republican voters head to the polls Saturday in South Carolina's primary election. Some voters say the race up to this point has largely been characterized by the candidates insulting one another.
You know, you almost can't imagine that it's going to get any more extreme or any more testy than it does. The candidates really going after each other.
Trump's spat with the Pope is the latest in a series of controversies throughout his campaign, though he still heads into Saturday voting with a significant lead in the polls over Texas Senator Ted Cruz and behind Cruz, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. British Prime Minister David Cameron says he's still trying to cut a deal with European partners on keeping Britain in the European Union. Cameron and other EU nation leaders are meeting in Brussels for talks chaired by European Council President Donald Tusk. Cameron said while he wants to keep Britain a member of the European Union, he'll stand his ground to defend British interests.
And as I've said, I'd only do a deal if we get what Britain needs. So we're going to get back in there, we're going to do some more work, and I'll do everything I can.
One of the sticking points involves welfare benefits for immigrants. At the summit, a group of East European states is trying to hold back how far their citizens can be denied welfare benefits in Britain, which is part of Cameron's drive to cut immigration.
Well, in other news, Bruce, Brazil, that country is still trying to fight the Zika virus outbreak, and in doing so, they're using a new form of biological control, and I suppose they're really digging into this food chain, right?
Yeah, exactly, so to speak. So up until this point, they've been distributing insecticides to different parts of the country, and they've been using the military to eliminate mosquitoes' breeding grounds. Now, on top of that, they're using Guppies, that's the biocontrol we spoke of. This small fish feed on mosquito larvae, which could stem the growth of insects in pools of stagnant water.
The fish is very resilient as it lives in places where there's a lot of sewerage and organic material, and where other species of fish will not survive.
The guppies also reproduce rapidly, meaning this could be a sustainable method to control the spread of the virus.
Right, so I suppose it's like, you know, having a cat so that you get rid of all your mice.
That's not a bad analogy, yeah.
Right. So is this proven to be an effective method in disease prevention?
Well, this isn't the first time it's been used, especially in places like southern India where there's a lot of malaria outbreaks. Guppies have been used in densely populated areas to control the spread of these mosquitoes in pools of stagnant water. So it's been used before and come out pretty well.
Right, but also on the negative side, I suppose this only highlights the fact that there is really no cure for the Zika virus because all they can do is get rid of the mosquitoes that could deliver Zika virus to you, right?
Exactly, just an attempt to quell the spread for now.
All right, Bruce, thank you so much for today and all of this week, and I will see you on Monday.
No problem.
Time now to get a check on the weather forecast. Let's go live to our Lee Ji-hyun at the Weather Center. Now, Ji-hyun, time does really fly. I mean, it feels like we just celebrated Lunar New Year's, but I guess that was already about 2 weeks ago as we're gearing up to celebrate another traditional day here in Korea, the Daeborum.
Tell me about it. You know, time does really fly, and Daeborum is the 15th day from the first day of New Year, based on the lunar calendar, and the day we get to see the first full moon of the year, and it happens to fall on next Monday this year.
Right, so for those sky gazers out there, the big question is, I suppose, will the weather condition be favorable enough for us to check out that full moon with the naked eye?
Well, so far, the chances of checking full moon on Daeborum are low. Lots of clouds will dominate the peninsula, but note that the moon will rise at 5:55 p.m. here in the capital. Now, the air quality today was not promising either, as Seoul started out under dusty conditions, but we can look forward to have better air quality tomorrow across the nation. So for those of you planning to be outside, well, not to worry about that, especially especially when there are a number of festivals taking place on the weekend to celebrate Daeboreum. Milder temperatures under partly sunny skies expected, so let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. Daily low here in Seoul will start out at -1 degree Celsius. 2 for Daegu and Busan and Jeju will start out the day at 5 and 7. And as for the daily highs, Seoul will top out at 7 degrees Celsius. 12 for Daegu and Busan, and Gwangju will top out at 11. Now starting Sunday, below average temperatures are expected next week with dry conditions for here in Seoul, but frequent rainy days are in store for the southern provinces. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is our broadcast on this Friday night. I'm Moon Gan-young. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a fabulous weekend, and we'll see you right back here same time Monday on NewsCenter.